The sun beats down upon the high Anatolian plateau. It is a vast and rugged land, a landscape of sweeping plains carved by deep river gorges and watched over by silent snow-capped mountains. Here, life is a constant struggle. The summers are harsh and dry, the winters are unforgivingly cold, yet it is in this very crucible of nature that a remarkable civilization took root, a people who would shape the destiny of the ancient world. They called this place the land of Hatti, and they were the Hittites. For centuries their story was lost, buried beneath the earth, a forgotten chapter in human history. Imagine standing here over 3,500 years ago. The air is filled with the scent of pine from the forested hills and the dust of sun-baked earth. In the distance, a formidable city rises from the plains. Its walls are built from massive stones, a testament to immense power and ambition. This is Hattusa, the capital of a mighty empire. So who were these enigmatic people? The Hittites were not native to the Anatolian heartland where they built their empire. They were Indo-Europeans, part of a great migration of peoples that spread across Europe and Asia thousands of years ago. Their language, the oldest recorded Indo-European tongue, gives us a clue to their origins. It is a language unlike those of their neighbors in Egypt or Mesopotamia. They arrived in Anatolia, the land we now call Turkey, sometime around 2000 BCE. They did not find an empty land. Anatolia was already home to ancient cultures like the Hatti, from whom the Hittites would take their name. The newcomers did not simply conquer and destroy. Instead, a fascinating process of mixing and merging began. The Hittites adopted many of the local customs, traditions, and most importantly, the local gods. Their homeland was a fortress created by nature itself. The high central plateau is a challenging environment, but it is also rich in resources. The mountains held vast deposits of metal ores including copper, silver, and crucially iron. The forests provided timber for building and for fueling their forges. The plains, though difficult to farm, could produce enough grain to feed a growing population. The rise of the Hittite Old Kingdom, around 1650 BCE, was swift and dramatic. A king named Hattusili I moved the capital to the formidable rock fortress of Hattusa. From this near-impregnable base, he and his successors launched a series of daring military campaigns. They were driven by a powerful ambition: to control the vital trade routes that crisscrossed the ancient world. These routes were the arteries of commerce, carrying precious metals, timber, and grain between the great civilizations. To control them was to control immense wealth and power. Their military was a formidable machine. The core of their army was the light, three-man war chariot. This was a revolutionary piece of military technology. While others used heavy, slower chariots, the Hittite version was built for speed and maneuverability. It carried a driver, a warrior with a spear, and a shield-bearer for protection. Swarms of these chariots could sweep across the battlefield, breaking enemy formations and creating chaos. They were the ancient equivalent of a tank, a weapon that gave the Hittites a decisive edge in battle for many years. But it was not just military might that built their empire. The Hittites were also skilled diplomats. They created a system of vassal treaties, a network of alliances with the smaller kingdoms they conquered. Perhaps their most significant advantage lay hidden in the earth. The Hittites were among the very first people to learn the secret of smelting and working iron. For centuries the world had been dominated by bronze, but iron was different. It was stronger, held a sharper edge, and its ores were more plentiful than the copper and tin needed for bronze. Every great empire has its great leaders, and for the Hittites, no king was greater than Suppiluliuma I. He ascended to the throne around 1344 BCE, at a time when the Hittite kingdom was in a state of crisis. But Suppiluliuma was a man of extraordinary vision and cunning and ruthless determination. He was a master strategist, both on the battlefield and in the world of diplomacy. His first challenge was the powerful Mitanni kingdom to the southeast. For generations, Mitanni had been the Hittites' main rival in the region. Suppiluliuma did not attack them head-on. Instead, he launched a brilliant and unexpected campaign. He led his army on a great arc, marching north and then sweeping down into Syria from the east, attacking the Mitanni heartland from its unprotected rear. The campaign was a stunning success. He shattered the Mitanni army, sacked their capital, and turned their once mighty kingdom into a Hittite vassal state. With Mitanni defeated, Suppiluliuma turned his gaze south towards the rich city-states of the Levant, many of which were under the control of Egypt. In a famous incident, the widowed queen of the Egyptian pharaoh Tutankhamun sent a letter to the Hittite king. She was desperate, with no heir, and begged him to send one of his sons to Egypt to marry her and become pharaoh. Suppiluliuma was suspicious, but eventually sent his son, Zananza. Tragically, the prince was murdered on his journey to Egypt, likely by a rival faction at the Egyptian court. This event sparked decades of hostility between the two great empires, setting the stage for an inevitable and epic confrontation. The death of the Hittite prince Zananza created a deep and lasting rift between the two superpowers of the age. Egypt and the Hittite Empire were now locked in a struggle for dominance. The prize was control of the Levant, the land bridge that connected Africa and Asia. This region, encompassing modern-day Syria, Lebanon, and Israel, was a crossroads of rich trade routes. For decades, a tense Cold War simmered between the two empires. They fought through their vassals and proxies, each trying to undermine the other's authority in the contested borderlands. The pharaohs of Egypt's magnificent 19th dynasty were not content to let the Hittite advance go unchallenged. Rulers like Seti I launched campaigns into Canaan and Syria, determined to win back the territories that had been lost. These were brutal, hard-fought wars. The Egyptian armies, with their own powerful chariot corps, pushed north, recapturing strategic cities like Kadesh. But the Hittites were resilient. As soon as the pharaoh returned to the Nile, the Hittite king would send his own forces to reclaim the lost ground. The balance of power shifted back and forth like a great tide. This was more than just a military conflict. It was a battle of ideologies, a clash of two very different worlds. Egypt was an ancient, conservative, and immensely wealthy civilization, ruled by a god-king, the pharaoh. Its power was centered on the predictable, life-giving flood of the Nile. The Hittites, by contrast, were a younger, more dynamic power from the rugged Highlands. Their king was a warrior and a chief priest, but he was not a god himself. He was the first among equals, ruling through a complex web of laws and treaties. These two giants were destined to meet in a decisive battle. The tension reached its peak during the reign of two of the most famous rulers in ancient history. In Egypt, the young, ambitious, and powerful Rameses II ascended the throne. In Hattusa, the Hittite king Muwatalli II ruled a vast and powerful empire. The stage was set for a monumental confrontation that would be remembered for millennia. In the 5th year of his reign, around 1274 BCE, Rameses II marched his army north. His goal was to capture the strategic fortress city of Kadesh, which controlled the plains of Syria. He commanded a huge force, perhaps 20,000 men, divided into 4 divisions named after the gods Amun, Ra, Ptah, and Set. Rameses, leading the Amun division, pushed ahead of the rest of his army, eager for glory. As he neared Kadesh, his scouts captured 2 local tribesmen. They told the pharaoh exactly what he wanted to hear, that the Hittite army was far away, afraid to face the might of Egypt. It was a trap. The Hittite king, Muwatalli II, had orchestrated a brilliant piece of deception. His own army, even larger than the Egyptian force and bolstered by troops from 18 different vassal states, was hidden just behind the city of Kadesh. He had gathered a massive force of over 3,000 war chariots. As Rameses and his lead division set up their camp, blissfully unaware of the danger, Muwatalli unleashed his attack. The Hittite chariots thundered across the plain, fording the Orontes river and smashing into the flank of the unsuspecting Ra division, which was still on the march. The Egyptian division disintegrated into chaos. The Hittite chariots then wheeled and charged directly into Rameses's camp. The attack was sudden and overwhelming. For a moment it seemed that the great pharaoh himself would be killed or captured. In his own accounts, which he later had carved on temple walls all over Egypt, Rameses claimed that he was abandoned by his troops and saved only by his own personal courage and the intervention of the god Amun. The reality was likely less heroic. The timely arrival of a supporting Egyptian force from the coast probably saved the day. The battle raged all day, a swirling, dusty chaos of men in chariots. By nightfall, both sides were exhausted. Thousands lay dead. The Hittites had failed to destroy the Egyptian army, but the Egyptians had failed to capture Kadesh. The battle was, in truth, a bloody stalemate. Ramesses returned to Egypt and declared a magnificent victory, covering his temples with heroic images of his triumph. The Hittites, however, remained in firm control of Kadesh and Syria. The battle had proven that neither side could decisively defeat the other. It was a lesson that would lead, years later, to one of history's first great peace treaties. While the Hittites were fearsome warriors, their greatness was not built on war alone. They were also remarkable innovators in law and governance. They created one of the most sophisticated legal codes of the ancient world. Unlike the harsh eye for an eye justice of their Mesopotamian neighbors, Hittite law was surprisingly humane. It focused on restitution rather than retribution. If a person stole an ox, for example, the punishment was not to cut off their hand, but to repay the value of the ox, often several times over. This practical approach aimed to restore balance to the community rather than simply inflict pain. Their laws covered all aspects of life, from murder and assault to divorce and agricultural disputes. The texts, preserved on clay tablets, reveal a society that valued order and fairness. There were different punishments for slaves and free citizens, but even slaves had certain rights. They could own property, marry free persons, and even buy their own freedom. The laws also show a fascinating glimpse into their daily concerns, with specific articles dealing with things like beekeeping, vineyard damage, and even the proper price for renting a farm animal. This was a society governed by rules, not just by the whims of a king. Their architectural achievements were just as impressive, shaped by the rugged landscape they called home. Their capital, Hattusa, was a masterpiece of defensive engineering. Built on a rocky spur, it was protected by a massive double wall that stretched for over 6 kilometers. The walls were punctuated by towers and pierced by monumental gates, each guarded by magnificent stone sculptures of lions or sphinxes. Within the walls, the city was a complex of temples, palaces, and archives. The Hittites were masters of building with stone on a colossal scale, a technique known as Cyclopean masonry. They cut and fitted huge, irregular blocks of stone together with remarkable precision, creating structures that have withstood the ravages of time for over 3,000 years. For over 400 years, the Hittite Empire stood as a pillar of the ancient world. It had weathered wars, rebellions, and assassinations. It had signed a peace treaty with Egypt, creating a stable balance of power. But around the year 1200 BCE, a shadow began to fall across the eastern Mediterranean. A period of profound crisis was beginning, a time that historians now call the Late Bronze Age collapse. It was a perfect storm of climate change, famine, mass migration, and systemic breakdown that would sweep away not just the Hittites, but many of the great civilizations of the age. The signs of trouble appear in the final clay tablet archives from Hattusa. The records speak of severe grain shortages. The Hittite king writes desperate letters to his vassals and even to the pharaoh of Egypt, pleading for shipments of grain to avert a famine. Then came the invaders. From the west, across the Aegean Sea, came waves of mysterious migrants known in Egyptian records as the Sea Peoples. They came in ships, raiding and burning the coastal cities of Anatolia and the Levant. The end came suddenly and violently. Around 1178 BCE, the great capital city of Hattusa was attacked, looted, and burned to the ground. The fire was so intense that it baked the clay tablets in the royal archives, preserving them for future archaeologists to find. But the empire itself was shattered. The fall of Hattusa was so complete that the Hittites were almost entirely forgotten. For 3,000 years they existed only as a brief and mysterious mention in the Old Testament. The rediscovery began in the 19th century, when European explorers started to notice strange ruins and rock carvings in central Turkey. Then, in the early 20th century, archaeologists began to excavate the massive mound that concealed the lost capital of Hattusa. The breakthrough came from a Czech scholar named Bedřich Hrozný. While studying the tablets during World War I, he came across a sentence that read, "Nu ninda an ezateni, watama ikuteni." He had cracked the code. He had proven that Hittite was an Indo-European language, and the door to their lost world was suddenly thrown open. Today, the story of the Hittites continues to be pieced together, tablet by tablet, stone by stone. They are no longer a forgotten people. We see their legacy in the very concept of an international peace treaty, like the one they signed with Egypt. We see their ingenuity in the early use of iron, a technology that would define the next age of human history. And we see their resilience in the magnificent ruins of their cities. They remain a powerful reminder that even the mightiest empires can fall, and that history has a way of burying its secrets, waiting patiently in the dust for us to find them.